I literally wanted to cry and leave. I wanted both of those things to happen very badly.
There are two things in the world that you can't oversell, and one is Italy, and the other one is Edmonton.
That's actually, wow, I love that. Can I use that?
It's as good as people say.
Hello, TheatreArtLife Podcast listeners. Today we're sharing with you an interview led by one of our contributors, Justin Mabardi. Justin Mabardi is a creative director and television director with experience in the production and development of live stage shows, live shows for television and television formats. He has worked in 20 countries on shows of every scale. We hope that you enjoy listening to his interview.
So then you picked up In the Heights. It was running off Broadway already, and you took it over?
No, I started it from the get-go.
From In the Heights off Broadway? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were saying it was already off Broadway.
No, it was about to go off Broadway.
I see.
So that's where I met Amber, because Amber had done the workshop of In the Heights.
Uh-huh.
And I promised the general manager I would interview the people that had done. Amber walked in the door and it was over at that point. I was like, you're the person. So we figured out how to do it off Broadway. It was a very, very difficult feat because we were a week into the off-Broadway production of In the Heights, and I called the general manager and I said, we are sorely understaffed. We have expectations that this is going to be a Broadway show.
Right.
Everybody expects Broadway quality out of this show, and you do not have nearly enough people working on it.
Interesting.
Like, I need another assistant.
Mm-hmm.
We need to hire a props person because there is no props person.
Right.
We need to hire some crew. We need to hire some wardrobe. We need to hire people.
Right.
And they did their best, but we still got to the first day of tech, and there was a sawhorse and a saw on stage and sawdust all over it because they were still building the set. And I had no choice but to grab a broom and start sweeping and mopping because we needed to start tech.
Yeah, it just was.
And then I remember our sound designer came to me while I was sweeping and mopping, Nevin Steinberg, who I still adore. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm sweeping and mopping." And he said, somebody else needs to be doing this. And I said, "I understand, but there is no one else doing this. Like, if I don't do it, it won't get done, and we won't start tech."
Right.
And he was like, "We're in trouble." We are. You're right. And we had to figure out like how to make this work, which we did.
Right.
But it was such a scrappy, at that point we were like, let's figure this out.
Right, just barely getting to tech is hard enough.
Many production meetings later, we were figuring out just how many people we needed.
And then you guys ran off Broadway for quite
We did like 6 months off Broadway, and probably could have done longer, but they were ready to sort of move it.
Mm-hmm. And then it moved straight to Broadway?
We took a 6-month hiatus and then went to Broadway.
Wow.
With the same cast. We added a few people. We staffed up for the Broadway show, and that was not since Bombay Dreams had I felt such love in a show and in a theater.
Right.
Between the audience, between the people on stage, between the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it was a cultural event.
Right.
That people were, and Lynn says this all the time, or used to say it all the time, where he wanted to write a show that he was proud to be in. Mm-hmm. That at that point, there weren't too many shows about Latinos.
Sure.
That weren't about holding a gun or, committing a crime.
Right.
So
In the Heights was notorious for having that kind of a company, a really positive group of people.
Yeah.
And it sort of was known kind of throughout, well, for sure in New York, but I'm sure elsewhere as well. And you were on that for quite some time, I think.
Yeah, I did that for 2 years. Mm-hmm. But it was my first PSM job. And after 2 years, I wanted to build my resume.
Sure.
I wanted to move on.
But before we get there, so you were now PSM on Broadway.
Yeah.
And did you feel nervous about that? Were you?
Yeah. There was a lot of, Amber and I had a lot of conversations where I said to her, I don't know what my style is.
Right.
I've been doing what Bonnie wants me to do. I've been doing what Steve wanted me to do before that. And I don't really know what my style is. I mean, the great thing about it is that I had a full tool bag. Like I came to it with all of Bonnie's tools and all of Steve's tools.
Sure.
And so if I didn't know how to handle it, how I wanted to handle a particular situation, I could open the tool bag and pull out what Bonnie would have done that night. And then just go, okay, well, we need an answer right now. Here's what I know Bonnie would have done, or here's what I know Steve would have done. And then someday I'll figure out what Jason would have done. But sometimes you don't have that time.
No. But, so there you were.
It took time for me to sort of figure out what is my style. Do I want a theater that has is really strict with rules? Do I want a theater that feels loose? Do I want a theater that feels individual? How do I wanted both of those things.
Right.
I wanted both Bonnie and Steve styles.
Right.
And I was trying to find a way to sort of, get them both in me so that I could communicate them. But it takes a while.
Sure. Did you feel like you misfired at all? Or do you feel like you nailed it from day one?
You misfire all the time because, there's times when your ego starts to get in the way. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of an ego job where people sort of tell you're the boss and tell you, what you say goes.
Right.
And all those things. So there's a lot of ego that can enter the job. And it's a really difficult choice to say, I need to set my ego aside in this moment, and I need to do what's best for the show.
Sure.
It's sometimes far more difficult than it seems.
So now, would you say that you have a style that you can encapsulate? That you can actually say in a sentence? You're like, my theater is...
No.
Still misfiring?
I think it's a constant search because even, I never wanted to write somebody up for being late.
Right.
That was one thing that always sort of I just didn't like it. And I would give a speech at the beginning of every new show when I had the cast alone and say, listen, I don't want to do this.
Right.
We are adults. We're all adults. Show up on time. Mm-hmm. And if you can't show up on time, then text me. Act like an adult. Right. And let's have adult conversations. And don't make me write notes that you were late because eventually we take money from you. You get pissed at me. I get pissed at you. It's a crappy thing to have to do.
Right.
And so I didn't for a long time. And there would be times when I would sit somebody down and say, listen, whether you realize it or not, you're habitually late.
Right. You're screwing
you need to figure that out. But then eventually you realize, sometimes you just got to do it.
Yeah. It's a tricky, there's sort of like what you wish you could do and what sort of you have to do.
Yeah.
But I think you're right though. I think it is important for people to have a moment to correct themselves.
Yeah.
Because, artists and actors and singers and dancers are all three, there's a lot of passionate people out there who are sometimes in a different world. And then they're showing up a bit late. They're not going to realize it. Or they do. Or they don't realize, what's actually happening. Some people do.
Yeah. I think you can almost, it's been very rare that you can't actually get through to someone.
Yeah.
If you really, it also, once you sort of realize I'm not here to tell you I don't like you.
Right.
I'm here to tell you where you've stepped out of line.
Right.
I like you.
Right.
But it's also my job to sort of say, you've crossed the line.
Sure.
And we are adults.
Right. I find that there's always a good reminder, which is literally like, this is as good as it gets.
Yes.
You're being paid to do what you love.
Yeah.
In one of the top places in the world to do it. This is as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And I think that we all forget that. This is what we were aiming at. Yeah. Now you're here, you're doing it, you're being paid to do it. Yeah. And still,
And it's when people say how exciting your job is as a stage manager, I always say, well, it's a job.
Right.
It is, there are moments that are incredible.
Sure.
And there are moments of wonder.
Right.
But the day in and day out is that it's a job.
Right.
Like your job, like everybody's job. Right.
So one of those exciting moments was when you guys, I'm sure, got to go to the White House.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so, huh? Yeah, I was one of the people who got chosen to go. Me and the sound designer and the assistant company manager got to do a pre-visit to the White House.
Wow. Just
to sort of check out the space and check out the acoustics and make sure everything was good. We got a private tour of anything we wanted a tour of.
Oh my God.
It was kind of incredible. We went into the kitchen and the chef gave us cookies. And it was We went to the florist. I mean, we went to everywhere.
You went you're
like we didn't say no. They said, "Do you want to?" We said, "Yes." We did. And then a few weeks later, showed up with the whole cast and like gave a performance.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. I think we all. I don't remember knowing that it was going to happen, and then all of a sudden it was just happening. I was so excited.
Yeah, well, that's how everything happened on the first year of Hamilton. Right. It was like, really, this is what? Okay, and then it was happening, and it took an immense amount of planning for all of those.
I'm sure. So then 2 years in, you leave In the Heights, and I'm sure you had bits and pieces, but was the next Broadway show that you brought up Hamilton?
The next show that I PSM'd? Mm-hmm. I did... Now you're going to make me think about it.
No.
I had what I call my 5-week curse. Because I did Wait Until Dark, Miracle Worker, ran for 5 weeks. I did, Magic Bird ran for 5 weeks. There was a third one in there and I can't remember. And then I did A Night with Janis Joplin, and that ran for like 4 months.
The curse was broken.
The curse was kind of broken. It wasn't a hit. And then I did a reading and ultimately the production of The Last Ship with Sting and Joe Mantello and Stephen Hoggett, all incredible artists that I was overwhelmed to be in the room with.
Right.
This is the point in my career where I figured out there's always a reason to be in the room. That you as a stage manager should figure out what that reason is before you do the show. Because as long as you know why you're there, and it's not just to sort of put another notch on your belt.
Right.
It's like, are you trying to build a relationship with the general manager on this one? Do you love this director and just want to watch him work?
Sure.
Do you, for what reason are you there? And for me, The Last Ship was, I didn't care how successful The Last Ship was. I wanted to watch the creative process between these three unique individuals.
Sure.
And how it met and how they met each other.
Right.
And it was a fascinating,
I'm sure,
thing to watch and overwhelming to sort of on a daily basis be in the room with Sting and Joe and Stephen.
It is a good point that you get to, at times, experience things that really no one else gets to experience. Like the actual creation of shows is a daunting and fascinating experience.
Yeah.
If only to just have your life taken away from you for a short period of time, it rewards you often with some unique memories and experiences that you'll never be able to explain again.
Exactly.
Basically.
Exactly. And if you can sort of take the time to appreciate it, which sometimes we have to move so fast and so get so overwhelmed with things to do on our list,
sure,
that we don't actually take the time to sort of say good morning and take in the day.
Yeah, it takes a moment.
That's one of those, but this was one of those projects where you just had to.
Right.
You just had to. We all looked at each other every day going, I can't believe I'm in this room.
How long did the show last for?
So sad. Like 3 or 4 months.
Oh, really?
I can't even remember when it opened. It didn't, we took it to Chicago, we teched it, it all went really well. It just wasn't sort of selling. And we got back to New York and it just wasn't selling. And I don't really know why. I think, the civilian population, that's who I call the people who are not sort of regular theater employed by or in the theater.
Sure.
Thought it was lovely, but it wasn't necessarily uplifting and it wasn't necessarily a hoot and it wasn't a big old dance number and it wasn't all those things that a musical sort of
is known for.
Yeah. But it was hauntingly beautiful. And the people in theater would come backstage and just be like, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
Like, so we were getting very sort of confused by the reaction. Like some people were just literally touched and overwhelmed.
Sure.
And people would, in the business, were reaching out to me saying, this is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
Amazing.
And if you like Sting's music, which I adore, then it was lovely to listen to.
Sure.
All night long too.
Sure.
And then Sting would Sting was such a pet. It was such a project of love for him that he was there like all the time. He was always walking in, and like he would hang up his coat in our office and just sit and talk with us, and then go hang out with the cast in the green room. And he was always there, which, that's the other thing is like when you have someone as known as Sting, who's not a jerk in any way, like he's the nicest person in the building. Nobody is allowed to be a jerk.
Right.
Like nobody gets to be a jerk. If Sting's not a jerk, you don't get to be a jerk.
Right.
And that made for a very interesting sort of dynamic. It's because people's egos often want to let them be jerks.
Right.
But they got constantly checked by somebody who's not a jerk, who's a megastar, who's walking in the building every day, and then introducing you to like people who would come see the show were friends of his.
Yeah. So
you're meeting these mega rock stars.
Amazing.
And film and television people.
Sure.
And so you just sort of go, wow. And then he went into the show. And when he went into the show, he got his own dressing room, but he would still come into the office and hang up his coat in our office every day. And I kept saying, you have a dressing room, right? And he's like, yeah, but I'm up there by myself. I don't want to be like, why would I go like hang out by myself? He's like, I would rather hang out here. And we're like, we don't got a problem with that.
No, of course not. And it must be such a unique experience for him to be in a Broadway show and like really try and connect in that way. Being on the road as everyone is a lonely experience. And
it's got to be hard to sort of try to understand why you can sell out, 10,000 stadium.
Oh, that's true.
Stadiums all over the world.
Right, but a Broadway house.
But this 1,400 seat Broadway house, you couldn't get half a house.
That's unbelievable.
Like it was pretty like there's a big disconnect.
Yeah,
and it's got to be one of the hardest things for him to hit.
Sure, I can imagine. So you closed that.
Yeah.
Crying.
Yeah, unhappy about that. I thought it was going to run forever.
Yeah.
Which is why when Tommy and Lynn would call me to say we're going to do a reading of Hamilton, which I still didn't know what it was. Can you join us? And I was like, no, I'm busy. I'm out of town. I'm working on this. And when they did the off-Broadway version of Hamilton, he said, can you come join us? Right. He said, actually, Tommy called and said, I know you can't because you're doing The Last Ship. And I said, that's true. But Tommy and I have always stayed in touch. We would go out for tea. We would go out, hang out. We would just sort of catch up.
Right.
So he always called me to sort of say, can you recommend somebody for this next project or whatever? Right. But when Last Ship was over, I wanted to see Hamilton. It was only Hamilton had only been running a couple of weeks. They were in previews at the public.
Right.
And Jeffrey was our producer. He was the producer downtown. And so I called and said, can I get tickets? And he's like, absolutely. So they put me like second row center.
Right in the booth.
Right. They put me like down front where the stage light was spilling on me. And I saw all my friends from In the Heights on stage. Lynn was there. Chris was there.
Right.
Seth was there. John Ruo was there. I mean, like all of these people I knew. Were... And then the designers were all friends of mine. And so I was just so conspicuous, but still just like overwhelmed with what I was watching. Like cried pretty much the whole time, just out of pride.
Yeah.
That I knew these people and still not fully comprehending what I was trying to wrap my head around.
Right. Because you had no connection to it until
None at all.
Well, that's kind of an interesting thing is to sort of get in there and see what I guess in hindsight, it's an interesting thing, but in the moment, you probably were just overwhelmed.
Yeah, totally overwhelmed.
I always say that Hamilton is one of those things that there are two things in the world that you can't oversell, and one is Italy, and the other one is Hamilton.
That's actually, wow, I love that. Can I use that?
It's as good as people say.
Both things are true.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, definitely.
So then how did you take
it was... Literally, the funny thing is that
you killed the other stage manager. They weren't available.
Before I went to see Hamilton, I think even before Last Ship was closed, Joe Mantello had given my name to 101 to stage manage his one-man show with Jim Parsons, the God Show. Can't remember that. But I had said yes.
Gotcha.
One, because Joe is an amazing director, but one of the first questions I ever asked him was like, who's your favorite stage manager and why? And he couldn't really answer that question. And I had seen that he'd worked with several different stage managers, and that's sort of a red flag that a director is difficult or doesn't like stage managers, which I think Joe would admit, that he works with a number of them, because it's like, I didn't like that one, let's move on to the next one.
Right.
Whereas a lot of directors will work with the same stage manager over and over again once they find the person they like. So for the fact that Joe called me a second time, I didn't care what the project was.
Sure.
I was like,
oh,
nice,
cool.
nice. Joe called me a second time. Let's do this.
Yeah.
So after I saw Hamilton, Jeffrey called me, the producer, and he said, can I assume that you haven't taken a job? And I said, no, actually, I did take a job. And he said, can I ask what? He said, can I ask you to just like,
not take it,
not start, or whatever. Can't remember how he put it.
Fake your death.
But he said, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with our show.
Gotcha. And
we would like for you. And I said, well, Jeffrey, there's no way I would say no to Hamilton.
Sure.
Let's be real. But I would like to get an answer, so I can give this other show a heads up. So within a few more weeks, I don't know how long it was, to be honest, Jeffrey made the call and said, we're good.
Great.
Let's do this.
Great.
And I said, okay.
Did you expect it to be the sensation that it is?
I mean, it's a constant awakening, isn't it? It's the same thing with Hairspray, where nobody anticipated that it would sell $2 million worth of tickets in a day. And yet it did. And you just sort of keep it's like you're watching an Olympic event on some level. And you're like, well, nobody can beat that score. And then you're like, whoa! It's like watching Shaun White on the snowboard last night. It was incredible.
Unbelievable, yeah.
But it was sort of the same thing where you just sort of watch it like, is it gonna?
Right.
And, I watched, the way I sort of realized it is the day the tickets went on sale, I went to Ticketmaster and have the seating chart, and I picked any sort of number, any random sort of date, and started early, sort of looking to see where I could buy tickets. And within a few hours, you could almost watch the dots disappear.
Wow.
Like it was selling that fast.
That's amazing.
It was truly amazing. And then, numbers would start rolling in where it was like, oh, we hit 1 million, or we hit 2, or we hit 5, or we hit, whatever. And it would just go. And it just kept exploding. And with each new sort of milestone, our heads continued to explode.
Amazing.
And so, no, I don't think even the most hopeful of the team were never dreamed it could do what it did.
Right.
But it did.
So yeah,
it did, and we all sat on the sidelines watching.
And it's not an overly technical show. There are beats. There is like an incredible three-tiered round table. Is that right?
We have a turntable and a donut.
And a donut. Okay.
So two turntables.
But was it a fairly easy tech process for you?
Yeah. I mean, not for them downtown.
Sure.
It was difficult for them downtown. But for us uptown, all that work was pretty much done.
Right.
So we flew through tech. I mean, they beefed up the lighting. They beefed up, there were lots of things that they sort of elevated the design on it from downtown to uptown. But as far as the teching the show, it was about finding where the cues land and keep moving.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then, so you already knew a lot of the cast, it sounded like. And then,
some, yeah. I mean, a good portion, yes.
Would you say at that moment, now you're production stage manager on a big hit, that you sort of knew, your second big hit? Well, I mean, as PSM is your second big hit.
Yeah.
That you sort of knew what theater you were running? Like, would you say that was the moment you knew you felt like, I'm the stage manager for real?
You know what? The thing is that I replaced a stage manager who wanted the job. And so, I never wanted to offend that stage manager, and I never wanted to grab ownership until I felt like I deserved it.
Sure.
And so it was, I don't talk about that at all. This is one of the only times you'll ever hear me talk about it, because I want to be as respectful as possible to somebody who wanted to move with the show.
Yeah, understandably.
So I shut that door and did not open it until I felt like I had ownership of the show, which took a couple years. It wasn't until really sort of last year where I thought, okay, I think I've been the stage manager who's been on this show the longest. You know?
Right. Fair
so now I own it.
Yeah.
On some level.
Right.
So no, ownership was not something I really ever had in the first year of Hamilton. I had to sort of move it and steer it and keep it sort of functioning and try to put out fires as they came up.
Sure.
And then try to schedule things as they came up, whether it be the White House or the Grammy Awards or the Tonys
endless.
or, it was just one thing. Thankfully, we chose not to do press.
Right.
Like, thankfully, we decided, let's not show too much leg on this one.
Yeah. Because you guys were hitting it out of the park.
Yeah. And we didn't need to.
Yeah, of course.
So, God, I can't even imagine if we were scheduling Good Morning America and the Thanksgiving Day Parade and all of these other things. I can't even imagine what it would have been like.
And then 2 years in, is this right? You were offered, the show was going to take on multiple companies, or they were planning to.
Yeah.
And you were offered to be production supervisor on the show.
Yeah, it was actually, I was sitting in tech with Neil Mazzella, the Broadway tech. And that was the first time I even considered the idea, because Neil was like, there's going to need to be a production supervisor, and that's going to need to be you. And I was like, I don't really know what that is, Neil. He said, nobody does.
So I don't think actually maybe a lot of people listening know what that is. So maybe now you could. I don't think anybody does, to be honest with you. There's no definition of this job. And I decided when it became a real thing, when the Tonys were done and I was going to need to sort of step out and start planning the next production, I went around and I had a conversation with Tom Widman, who was the production supervisor on Wicked, asked him what he did, how he defined the job. And then I sat down with Clifford Schwartz, who's a production supervisor over at Disney, who does all of their shows, what he did and how he structured his job. They were vastly different. And so I picked and chose the pieces that I thought applied to Hamilton. Sure.
I put sort of a bullet point little thing together, and then I took it to the office and I said, this is what I think the job is. And they said, great, so do we. Get to work. Because they were lining up shows every 6 months at that point.
That's amazing. So when was the second company opened, and where was it?
Chicago was the second company. It started first rehearsal was like August, or after the Tony Awards. So I had started planning that one before the Tony Awards.
Right.
And then I officially sort of stepped out as stage manager, so I could start helping.
So this would have been August of 2016.
This would be August of 2016. That is correct. It opened in October, early October or late September.
Right.
In Chicago.
And since then, you've opened companies in Los Angeles, London.
We then, as soon as we finished Chicago, we were less than 2 or 3 months away from starting rehearsal for the first national tour, which was going to sit in San Francisco for 4 months, sit in LA for 5 months, and then go on tour. So we barely finished Chicago before we were ready to start.
Wow.
Yeah, because we started rehearsal in January.
And so now you have several 4 companies open?
We have 5.
5 companies open. And is that it for the moment?
No, God, no. Oh. They will be coming fast and furious.
Vietnam.
That's right. Yeah, there's lots of plans in the works. I mean, I sort of find out about them, 18 months ahead of time, because we'll have, Puerto Rico opens next. This will be the sort of probably the longest breather we get between now and November, because we just opened the second national in Seattle,
right? And
I got back Sunday from opening that one.
Right.
We did London. I went there for like 2.5, 3 months. So yeah, they've been coming pretty fast and furious.
And how was that, opening up a show in London? Was that your first time opening a show in the UK?
It was. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, we were faced with the additional challenge of a massive renovation, like a full restoration renovation happening to the Victoria Palace Theatre, which is incredible. Like one of the top 3 most beautiful theaters I've ever seen. Like Cameron McIntosh did a remarkable job. But sort of it collided with the install of Hamilton.
Sure.
And so it did make for many challenging days.
Mm-hmm.
But
how did you pick your production stage manager for that show?
We sort of went with recommendations from the technical supervisor on the show. Made some recommendations, and then I did Skype interviews with a few people, and then landed with the stage manager that we had.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
and so now you get a beat. You got to take a deep breath before you're off again. I guess looking back, now knowing that Steve Beckler was telling the truth when he said you were going to skyrocket before you even knew it.
Yeah.
Do you think looking back you would have done anything differently with how you approached your career?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there was a moment sort of in the middle of my career, after I had done a couple of PSM jobs, that I realized that the people that were coming out of school had really great organizational skills, and they had really great paperwork skills. Like they were sort of dazzling me with Excel and spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't have great people skills. Right. And that's so I think for me personally, I like the way I came up because I developed the people skills first and then developed the technical / spreadsheet skills, which is, I mean, as long as you have both, I feel like you get there. But it did feel like there was a moment where a lot of schools started stage manager programs right out of, they were popping up everywhere.
Sure.
And the people that were coming out had great sort of technical skills, but no people skills.
Right.
And I feel like that's now the adjustment that colleges are beginning to make, is that they understand that they're managing people. Mm-hmm. They're not stage manager is not a great job or a great title for the job, because you're actually managing actors and people.
So are you saying that you wish you had gone to school?
Yeah, I guess I'm saying I wish I had better technical skills coming in. But I'm not unhappy with where I ended up.
No, of course.
So
I was going to say,
it's sort of hard to say, that I didn't take the right path, because I feel like I won the lottery with this job.
Yeah, of course. And then, do you think? Well, first of all, do you have, I guess, advice for any aspiring stage managers? I mean, I think it's really a good point to show your trajectory coming from someone who was even sure what stage managers did.
Yeah.
I mean, and literally being one of the 3 or 4 production supervisors on Broadway.
Yeah.
It's a testament to who you are more than, let's say, how you came up. No, I mean, it's true, because it means that the people skills are just as important as, say, the technical skills, up until a point where you need to be able to pick up both.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess particularly for people in other parts of the world who don't really have access to, the kind of schools that are out there for stage managers. I mean, it's a good point, as people are aiming, maybe you are opening up a Hamilton in Southeast Asia or in, Africa or wherever. And, what kind of stage manager would you be looking for locally?
I mean, I guess I don't know the answer to that. I try to gel with the people that I interview. I do look, obviously, at their experience. I want to know that they can handle the job, but I do want to make sure that I'm actually sort of connected to the people. When I go looking for people on Hamilton, this creative team and this sort of staff all the way through are really nice people.
Right.
And they like to work with nice people. They like good people in the room. And that's something that Tommy Kail especially has a real sort of eye for, are lovely people. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's sort of a roundabout way to pat myself on the back, I guess. But that's not how I'm really thinking about it. But that's what I've realized that I need to also sort of take on that extra sort of thing that I'm looking for.
Right.
People are like, can I connect with you?
Right.
And do you feel like solid in your own shoes?
Right.
And it's kind of why I tell people, don't try to dazzle me.
Right.
Because then you have that pressure and you're not yourself in that moment.
Well, Jason Bassett, thank you for joining us.
Gosh. that was a very long conversation.
Please write a review on our podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast, and let your friends know about us. You can learn more about Theatre Art Life by visiting our website at www.theatreartlife.com. And you can also follow us on social media and leave your questions and comments on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, or YouTube. We want to thank David Sire for composing the music for our podcast, and Michelle Strata, who is our sound engineer. We are your hosts, Anna and Anna, and this is the Theatre Art Life Podcast, where we put the spotlight on those who create live entertainment around the world.